Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into something intense, something critical, the world of medical residency training.
Yeah, it's an environment known for pressure, but we're looking beyond just anecdotes today. We're digging into the data.
Exactly. The long hours, the immense responsibility, it takes a toll. And our mission here is to understand that toll on the doctors themselves and, crucially, on patient safety.
Right. We've got studies looking at everything from depression rates to genetics, errors, even workplace abuse. It paints a pretty stark picture.
Okay, let's start at the beginning, the psychological impact. What's the baseline? How do these residents look before they dive in?
So researchers used a standard tool, the PHQ-9, to measure depressive symptoms. Before internship, the average score for these incoming doctors was just 2.4. These are, high-functioning individuals.
It's very low baseline. Okay, so what happens once they actually start their training?
Well, that's where you see this dramatic shift. During the internship year, that average PHQ-9 score jumps. It goes up to 6.4.
Wow, okay, so that's not just a little stress. That's a significant increase in depressive symptoms across the board.
It really is. And it points directly to the environment itself as a major factor.
So how many actually cross the threshold into, like, clinical depression? What are the numbers there?
Yeah, this is maybe the most staggering part. Before starting, only about 3.9% met the criteria for depression.
Okay, still pretty low.
Right. But during that internship year, the average prevalence shoots up to 25.7%. A quarter of them, on average, meeting criteria at any given time.
A quarter, that's huge.
And it gets worse. Over the course of that single year, the sources found that 41.8%, almost half, met the criteria for major depression at least once.
42% in 1 year. That sounds less like training and more like, what, like a system that's manufacturing illness.
It definitely suggests the environment is a powerful trigger, a kind of depression factory for a huge chunk of trainees.
Okay, so why? What makes some people more vulnerable than others? Let's break down the predictors the sources identified. You mentioned environmental, psychological, even genetic factors.
Exactly. Let's start with the factors they measured before the internship even began. Things that predicted a bigger jump in symptoms once the stress hit.
Okay, what were they?
Things like being female, having a prior history of major depression, scoring higher on neuroticism, which is basically a tendency towards anxiety or negative emotions, and also having a difficult early family background.
So some pre-existing vulnerabilities, yeah. But what about factors during the internship? Things that happen on the job?
Right, because even those without those baseline risks were affected. During the internship, the big things were, perhaps unsurprisingly, more work hours on average, perceiving that you'd made a medical error, and also just dealing with stressful life events outside of work.
The work hours connection feels intuitive, but you mentioned genetics. That sounds less obvious. Tell me about that.
Yeah, this was a really fascinating finding in the source material. It involves a specific gene related to serotonin, the neurotransmitter involved in mood. It's called the serotonin transporter gene, or 5-HT-TLPR.
Okay, the serotonin gene, what's the link?
Well, they looked at different versions or alleles of this gene. And in subjects of European-American ancestry, they found that carrying at least one copy of a specific version, a low-functioning one, that doesn't recycle serotonin as efficiently led to something pretty significant.
Which was?
Those individuals experienced a 43% greater increase in depressive symptoms during the internship compared to those with two copies of the high-functioning version.
43%, just based on carrying a certain version of this gene? That's incredible. So their biology made them more susceptible to the residency stress.
It appears so. And interestingly, this genetic sensitivity seemed to specifically interact with neuroticism and, crucially, with the average work hours.
Ah, so it amplified the effect of the grind, the chronic stress.
Precisely. It suggests this genetic variant might make people more sensitive to those ongoing daily stressors like long weeks, rather than, say, a single major traumatic event or a big medical error.
That's a key distinction. The constant exhaustion is literally hitting a genetic vulnerability harder. And you mentioned this was specific to certain groups.
Yeah, the study noted they didn't find the same effect for this genotype among the Asian subjects in their sample. It highlights that these genetic factors can be population-specific.
Right. Okay, so we have intense stress leading to high rates of depression, sometimes amplified by genetics. Now, the critical next question, what does this mean for patients?
This is really the heart of the matter. But first, it's probably good to quickly distinguish between burnout and depression, because people use them interchangeably sometimes.
Good point.
Burnout is more of an occupational thing, feeling emotionally exhausted, detached from your work or patients, feeling like you're not achieving much. And it's common. One study found like 46% of residents experience it.
Okay, so burnout is work-related exhaustion and cynicism. How's depression different in this context?
Clinical depression is a mood disorder. It involves things like persistent sadness, loss of interest or pleasure, fatigue, changes in sleep or appetite, sometimes even suicidal thoughts. It's a clinical diagnosis.
And according to the sources, it's depression specifically that seems most strongly linked to patient harm.
Exactly. There was a study focusing on pediatric residents that found something really alarming. Residents who screened positive for depression had a threefold higher rate of medical errors that actually harmed patients. Harmful medical errors.
3 times the risk of harming a patient, directly linked to the resident's depression. That's a patient safety crisis, plain and simple.
It absolutely is. And it's important to note, while burnout alone was linked to errors in some basic analyses when they controlled for other factors, the strong, significant predictor of harmful errors was depression.
That really underscores the need for actual mental health treatment, not just, wellness lectures.
Precisely.
Let's talk about the structural drivers, especially the hours. What did the data show for more senior residents, like second year and beyond? Is there a point where the risk clearly goes up?
Yeah, the sources show a clear dose-response relationship. The risk of self-reported medical errors starts to increase significantly once residents work more than 48 hours in a week.
So basically, more than a standard, albeit long, work week already pushes up the error risk.
Correct. And it climbs steeply from there. Working between 60 and 70 hours a week, that doubled the odds of reporting an error.
Doubled. And what about hitting those really high numbers near the 80-hour limit?
Working more than 80 hours a week was associated with nearly 4 times higher odds of reporting a medical error compared to those working fewer hours.
4 times. Just by working the hours that are often considered, part of normal culture, that's deeply concerning. And it wasn't just the weekly total, was it? Extended shifts played a role, too.
That's right. The sources indicated a kind of synergistic effect. Long shifts, like those 24-hour-plus calls, combined with high overall weekly hours, amplify the risk even further. It's not just one or the other. The combination is particularly dangerous for patient safety. The fatigue builds up.
And this fatigue doesn't just impact patients, it impacts the doctor's own safety, too, right?
Absolutely. The data is pretty clear on this. Working long hours, again, particularly over 48 hours a week, showed a dose-dependent increase in risks to the resident themselves.
Like what kind of risks?
Things like occupational exposures, needle stick injuries, percutaneous injuries is the term, also near-miss car crashes on the commute, and even significant attentional failures on the job.
Attentional failures, like what?
Like literally falling asleep during patient rounds, in conferences, even during surgery in some reported cases.
Falling asleep during surgery? That's terrifying. And the needle sticks, I recall a stat on that.
Yeah, it was striking. Working over 80 hours a week led to 5.8 times higher odds of reporting a needle stick injury compared to shorter hours. That carries risks of bloodborne infections, obviously.
Nearly 6 times the risk.
And you mentioned car crashes.
Yes, specifically motor vehicle crashes, or near misses, happening when the resident was leaving work after a long shift. The fatigue directly translates into danger on the road.
So they survive the shift, then face a high-risk commute. Is there a recommended fix for that specific danger?
The sources suggest a very practical institutional response. Provide safe transportation options. Things like taxi vouchers or rideshare credits for residents who are too tired to drive safely after their shift ends.
This is like a basic safety measure if the system is demanding that level of exhaustion.
It really does. If you create the hazard, you should provide the mitigation.
Okay, beyond fatigue and depression driven by hours, there are other systemic issues, right? Vulnerabilities and, frankly, abuse within the training environment. Yes, absolutely. The system puts pressure on everyone, but some groups face unique challenges. For instance, residency often overlaps with peak childbearing years.
Right. How does the system handle pregnancy?
Often, not well. One survey found that a majority of female residents, something like 62%, actually postponed pregnancy, specifically because they felt the residency environment lacked support.
Wow. So they felt forced to choose between their career progression and starting a family?
Pretty much. And for those who do become pregnant during residency, especially if they stay on demanding call schedules, the health risks are significant.
What kind of risks?
The sources highlighted much higher rates of serious obstetric complications. For example, the miscarriage rate for pregnant residents on call was reported at 11.8% compared to about 4.2% in the general population.
Nearly triple the rate of miscarriage. That's devastating. It shows the physiological cost.
It really does.
Yeah.
And the overall complication rate was also starkly different based on call frequency. Pregnant residents on call more than 6 nights a month had an overall complication rate of almost 50%, 49.3%, compared to about 26% for those on call 6 or fewer nights.
So the workload directly translates to higher health risks for both the resident and the pregnancy.
Clearly. And layered on top of all this pressure is the issue of workplace abuse.
Bullying and harassment.
Yes, it's disturbingly common. A major review estimated that the global prevalence of bullying among medical residents is around 51%, basically 1 in 2.
Half of all residents experience bullying. That's systemic.
It is. And the sources note that female residents and those from minority groups often face even higher odds of experiencing it.
Are there specific environments where it's worse?
High-stress areas like the emergency departments seem particularly bad. One study of EM residents found nearly everyone, 96.6%, reported verbal harassment. Verbal threats were reported by 78%.
Almost universal verbal abuse. What about other forms?
Over half, 52%, reported experiencing sexual harassment, often from patients. A lot of the abuse, actually the verbal threats, the harassment, sometimes physical violence comes from patients or their visitors, frequently linked to substance use or psychiatric issues. It makes for a really hostile work environment.
Okay, so let's try to pull all these threads together. We have extreme hours leading to fatigue, depression, genetic vulnerabilities being triggered, significantly increased risk of medical errors harming patients, risks to the resident's own safety, specific dangers during pregnancy, and widespread bullying and harassment. What's the big takeaway for our listener?
I think the core message is that the structure of current medical training isn't just stressful, it's actively harmful. The sources draw a direct, measurable line from the intense demands of residency to a significantly increased risk of clinical depression hitting over 25% prevalence.
And that depression, along with the sheer fatigue from inhumane hours, directly fuels patient safety risks. We saw the numbers. 3 times higher harmful errors for depressed residents, nearly 4 times higher error odds for those working over 80 hours. These aren't abstract risks. They are real costs paid by patients and doctors.
Exactly. And this leads to a really important disconnect highlighted in the sources, the gap in perception between the trainees living this reality and the faculty or administrators overseeing the system.
How so?
Well, studies show residents generally feel that things like duty hour restrictions do improve their well-being. But other data suggests faculty often underestimate the severity of residents' struggles. Their workload, their emotional state, the safety compromises, they don't always see it the way the residents experience it.
Which brings us to maybe the final provocative thought for you, the listener. If the evidence is so clear linking long hours and depression to harm, and the public is actually overwhelmingly against these long shifts, one study found 97% disagree with allowing 24-plus-hour shifts, why does this culture persist?
Yeah, why does this tradition of excessive hours continue when the costs, both human and medical, are so well documented? Is it truly about education? Or is it cultural inertia overriding safety and well-being?
It seems like a critical question. The data suggests we know better, but the system hasn't fully changed. It's about recognizing that human cost and asking why traditions still outweigh safety.
A crucial point to reflect on.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into a really vital topic.